Italian Americans were involved in organized crime.
Yeah, Mafia! Mafia!
The purpose was to combat defamation and stereotyping, especially in motion pictures, movies, television.
We were always being defamed. Every Italian American was in the Mafia. If you were successful, no matter how hard you worked, you were labeled that you were in the mob. So it was really a good cause when it first initially was developed.
Support was so great that when the League held its inaugural rally on June the 11th, 1970, New York was brought to a standstill.
There was estimates from 250,000 people upwards.
A lot of yelling and screaming, a lot of showbiz personalities came, some sang, some told jokes. It was pretty congenial at the beginning.
The news that Paramount intended to shoot a Mafia epic on the same streets where they were protesting enraged the members of the League.
We will endure anything, fight anyone that is discriminating, defaming our people at all times.
When The Godfather was announced, the Civil Rights League totally realized that this would never be positive for the Italian Americans.
They claimed there was no mafia, that there was no Cosa Nostra, and they didn't want us to make a movie about mafia or Cosa Nostra.
The Mafia is in Italy. How many? I don't know. They're in Italy. They're not here.
But they were. The League's charismatic and hugely powerful frontman, Joe Colombo, was the head of one of 5 mafia dynasties that had a stranglehold over the streets of New York.
Here was a man who was undoubtedly the head of a major mafia organization, and at the same time claimed he was fighting for Italian-American civil rights.
As far as they were concerned, he was a good-natured, pleasant person who deeply believed in the rights of Italian Americans. The fact that he was also being investigated on about 12 federal charges for larceny, embezzlement, gambling, and corruption probably sort of slipped through the cracks.
Joe Colombo decided to turn the League's discontent into direct action against the Godfather.
The League is under God's eyes, and as long as it does good things, the League will get stronger and stronger. And those who go against the League will feel his sting.
Back in Hollywood, 3,000 miles away, a campaign of violence and intimidation began.
The threats against Paramount were coming from the League and the mob, which is one entity. There was no distinguishing one from the other at that time because the mob totally took over the movement. Now, there were renegades. There were guys within the mob who were looking to go around and make scores on their own.
The first person targeted was the Godfather's producer, Al Ruddy, who began receiving sinister phone calls.
They were threatening his life, and that's very scary. I mean, they would make veiled threats about his family and everything else. And yeah, he was very nervous about the whole thing.
I was notified by some people in the LAPD, and I'm sure coming from Washington, but basically locally, that I was being trailed. I was being followed every place I went in Los Angeles.
Al, who's in himself a great Italian war hero, decided that he would trade cars with me.
One night, my secretary, Betty McCart, took my dookie out to her house.
And in the middle of the night, someone blew out all the windows to the car and left a note where the windshield had been, saying that they didn't want the picture made.
So we were getting subtle messages.
Bob Evans, the head of production for Paramount, was threatened, as was his wife, Allie McGraw.
Bob got a call from the League saying they didn't want to see the movie made, and if it was made, this made a lot of problems. So Bob said, I'm not producing it, Al Ruddy is. And Joe said, when we kill a snake, we chop its head off first.
In defiance of this intimidation campaign, Al Ruddy and the Godfather crew moved to New York. They set up offices at Paramount's parent company, Gulf and Western, in preparation for filming. But the threats were becoming far more menacing.
There were bomb threats at Gulf and Western's building in New York City, where they had to clear the building at least twice.
We knew that the bombs, as far as the Italian-American Civil Rights League were concerned, were bogus, the bomb scares. We knew it, but you had to respond to them. because of the prevalence of all the bombings going around that whole scene.
The fear of bombings was well-founded. In 1970, a wave of politically motivated terrorist attacks had swept America. The Black Panthers, a radical black power movement, had been caught plotting to blow up stores across Manhattan.
You gotta remember, in the early 70s, the Black Panthers were very active then. The BLA, the Black Liberation Army, was very active then. Weather Underground were very active then. They were actually planting bombs in the Capitol building in Washington and police headquarters in Manhattan. So they took advantage of that, just like they took advantage of the civil rights movement, which started in this country in the 60s.
Undeterred, Al Ruddy and his team continued. But by doing so, they walked into the heartland of the New York Mafia. Coppola's determination to stay faithful to Puzo's novel meant shooting in Little Italy, an area under Mafia control. They were unprepared for the hostility they encountered.
The location scouts were trying to find houses or businesses in Little Italy in New York City that they could use to make The Godfather.
They would set it up and they would get the people to agree that they would do it. And then when we'd go to that location, suddenly they'd change their minds.
Through the League, the Mafia had begun a fresh campaign of intimidation and then extortion of the residents of Little Italy.
The Italian Mafia went into Italian grocery stores and meat stores and bars and catering establishments and forced them to put their signs in their window. And the people who put those in their windows would have to pay the mob for the privilege of putting those things in their windows. So it was a total intimidation factor, not only of the people who made The Godfather, but also of the Italian-American community in New York City and the surrounding area.
Terrified of reprisals, the residents had no choice but to turn the production team away.
We had so little money to deal with that every time one of these things happened, it was a major blow to the picture. And so it wasn't just a matter of inconvenience, it was a matter of dollars and cents.
Francis, without any permission, came to Mulberry Street to do a test. And Saeed just built this Cinemobile. He had like a main 4 on equipment. They parked it on the street and went into Umberto's to have lunch. And when they came out, the truck was gone. They were just showing them that, you know, you're not coming here. And he was just doing test shots.
It had become obvious to Paramount that Little Italy was out of bounds. And more worryingly, the League's leader, Mafia crime boss Joe Colombo, held an ace card that could shut down the production for good. By the 1970s, the Mafia had infiltrated the labor unions. Within hours, they could organize pickets, boycotts, and all-out strikes. If Colombo turned the unions against Paramount, they wouldn't be able to shoot a single frame.
You can't make the picture if the food trucks don't show up and the supply trucks don't roll on time, and you can't move your supplies and your people around the city.
Nothing was going to move forward past a certain point unless we sat down with the League or the people who were really obstacles to us making this movie. It became very apparent.
They knew they had to cooperate. They knew they needed a sympathetic mafia to shoot that film, especially in New York.
Left with no choice, Al Ruddy had to come face to face with the Mafia Don who was stopping The Godfather in its tracks. Desperate to strike a deal that would appease not only the Italian-American community, but also the New York Mafia, Al Ruddy agreed to meet Joe Colombo at a hotel in Midtown Manhattan.
Al goes to a meeting at the Park Sheraton Hotel thinking it's going to be a small group, and what it winds up being is 600 members in a giant ballroom all ready to take him apart. At that meeting, in front of 600 people, Al told them the truth, which was that the movie wasn't going to stereotype all Italian Americans, and that there were corrupt Irish people and corrupt Jewish people and, you know, corrupt WASPs in the movie too.
I said, this is not going to be one of those cliche Italian, let's get the Italian gangsters in America, because then it's not going to have the broad appeal that worked for the book.
But the League was baying for blood. To confirm Ruddy's claims that the film would not defame Italian Americans, Joe Colombo demanded a private meeting to read the script. There was no way that Ruddy could have predicted what was about to happen.